welcome back to another day of 11th grade U.S. history. Today we're going to be talking about the Boston Massacre or the King Street Incident. So that's another name for it, but you'll learn why in a second. All right, so we have rising tensions going on at this time. Can anyone give me a kind of like backdrop to about before 1770? You know any major events?
The French and Indian War.
Yes, perfect. And what was that about, Don?
It was about this young man named George.
Yep.
He crossed over into a place that he shouldn't have, that was occupied by French soldiers, and yes, he was captured.
They started a great war, right?
Some would call it World War Zero.
Yeah, I mean, it was on the global scale. We're more focusing on the impacts in the colonies. You would make a great history major one day, I'm thinking. But anyways, with the 7 Years' War, Britain wins. They drive out a lot of the French colonists. And what ends up happening is a lot of taxation being incurred on the British colonists because they have to pay for this war debt. Now, this seems like a pretty reasonable ask, but as we've learned, our British colonists have this idea of Eleutherianism, or freedom, and they believe they shouldn't be paying these taxes, especially when they have no representation in Parliament. No taxation and representation. No taxation without representation. Does anyone remember who said that?
No.
Patrick Henry. So, yeah, they want actual representation in Congress, in Parliament, as opposed to virtual representation, which is what's going on right now. Parliament thinks they can represent all their colonies. And in their view right now, the colonies are only used to help out the mother country. Anyways, on to the next thing. We have the Stamp Act and Quartering Act, which we covered last class. These taxes were on legal and official papers in the American colonies, which ended up being just another tax for the Stamp Act that just angered the colonists. They didn't want to pay the taxes. They didn't see why. This is because of something called salutary neglect, which was utilized by the British to govern, where they're kind of hands-off thing. It's kind of like when you're on the freeway and the posted speed is 65, but sometimes people go over that, but they're not really trying to enforce it. You know, like, unless you're going about like 99 or something crazy like that, they're not trying to enforce it. They're giving like hands-off approach. But with the taxes, they're kind of going back on that salutary neglect they had. Anyways, after that, we have the Quartering Act, which stationed soldiers in houses. There was an initial backlash to this, but why would this become a problem from what we've learned? Well, oh, Kevin, you got it.
Yeah, well, I think that, I guess people just wouldn't like soldiers in their homes. Like, it was probably a good thing to have, yeah.
Encroaching on their freedom.
Yeah.
So, and we talked about it. They have this idea of freedom just baked in their DNA. And that's why we also have the Sons of Liberty, which will come later, based on that freedom idea. Anyway, township duties, last thing. Taxes, more like a euphemism. That's why they're called duties. But just more taxes that angered the British colonists. Anyways, let's get to March 5th, 1770, King Street, Boston. It's a cold night, snow on the ground and all that. There is the Custom House, where there's a bit of like the King's revenue in there. We have a lone private Hugh White guarding it, and you know a few workers. One of them Crispus Attucks, a man of indigenous and African descent. They all come out, and they got some liquid courage in them. So, and they're a little upset about all these British soldiers, you know, encroaching on their freedom with these taxes and all that. They start throwing snowballs. Private Hugh White, he gets a little nervous. He's kind of backed into a corner. And, yeah, so after that, he calls for backup from William Preston and a group of soldiers. And, yeah, it keeps going on. They're throwing rocks now, snowballs. They start trying to club them. Somebody says fire. And then, bam, five workers, 5 colonists are dead. Illustrated in this photo. So, this is actually a newspaper article. This is engraving done by someone we'll mention later, but here it is. So, okay, for my description, does this look like self-defense, where the soldiers backed up into a corner?
No.
No. It looks like they're deliberately attacking the colonists. You also notice it's called the Bloody Massacre. I don't know if you can read that from up there, but, and these leads us to our next slide, the massacre, propaganda at work. Can anyone name either one of these guys?
Samuel Adams?
No. That's Sam Adams. What about that guy? That's Paul Revere. You know, they're concocting all their propaganda. These guys These guys are up to something. But I looked up the definition of massacre for you guys. So it's the act or an instance of killing a number of usually helpless or unresisting human beings under circumstances of atrocity or cruelty. Now, would you say any of that was an atrocity of, 5 people dead, that's sad. But when you think of atrocity, what do you think of? Do you think of just a small, skirmish in the street, or do you think of, thousands of people dying? It doesn't sit right with me. All right, so this is propaganda. Anyone know what propaganda is?
Mm-hmm.
Care to enlighten us? All right, I don't know who said anything.
Oh yeah, it was me. I feel like it's any form of verbiage or art, artistry, oftentimes advertisements that is trying to give off a certain particular political or motivational message.
Very good, Ashley. So yeah, this is what they're doing. This is what Paul Revere, Samuel Adams, they're Sons of Liberty at this time. They're working against the British. They're protesting taxation. And this is a way of them rallying against taxation and British occupation and all that. So this is them exaggerating the details of the events to paint the British in a really bad light. You can see they look pretty, it's a massacre over here. But in actuality, it's only 5 dead, but they're painting it out to be one of the greatest atrocities. So this is propaganda at work. Can anyone think of any other instances in history where propaganda has been used?
Consumer culture in the 40s because of the war.
That's perfect. Very good, Ashley. All right. So, I like John Adams. This is my favorite part of this story. He, will end up to be the 2nd president of the United States, but as you can see, kind of with Paul Revere and Samuel Adams, and John Adams as well, you got all the major players of the Revolution coming in. John Adams insists on a fair trial for the British soldiers, which, he gets a lot of flack for from his associates, because, they want to see him hang. They've committed this great crime. But John Adams says, no, we have to uphold the law. And I have a quote here for you. And he's defending the British colonists, or not the British colonists, the British soldiers occupying. He says, the law and all vicissitudes of government, fluctuations of passions or flights of enthusiasm will preserve a steady, undeviating course. It will not bend to the uncertain wishes, imaginations, and wanton tempers of men. I think that's a great quote. It just really sums up what he's doing. He's not going to trade one tyranny for another. He's setting a great American legal precedent of presumption of innocence, which is if you end up in court, it's a great thing because they don't automatically go guilty. And he introduced the phrase reasonable doubt for evidence. So all the soldiers are acquitted, which I think John Adams did a really good thing here. And he'll go on to say, one of his most proudest moments, calls it one of the most gallant, generous, manly, disinterested actions of my whole life, one of the best pieces of service I ever rendered to my country. All right. So results, aftermath, and conclusion. This only served to amplify the discontent of colonists with Parliament and the occupation of British soldiers. This is just one step to the revolution. This is why in maybe a history class you had before, this always gets mentioned, because this is just another step. And it'll lead to just more and more bold actions by the Sons of Liberty and the British colonists. Featured here, which we'll get to next class, is the Boston Tea Party. So you can see how grand all this is and all that. But they're going to start to see more of the need for independence. No one's really sold on independence yet, but this is just another step towards it. And it's really going to bring all the colonists together against the British. So any thoughts as we conclude? All right, guys. Well, do your homework tonight, and thank you.